Hey guys, Derek here. So in today's video I'm going to show you guys how to get good with perspective, and I'll be covering the three basic points, which is 1 point, 2 point, 3 point perspective. Without further ado, let's get straight to it. Alright, so let's start. First up, 1 point perspective. Okay, this is when all the objects or characters in your image are influenced by this one vanishing point in the distance. So the vanishing point is where all these lines that you see on the grid, they converge, and you see this thick line over here, that is known as the horizon line. Okay, it's the horizon as we know it, the natural meaning of the horizon, right? Okay, so that's when like the sky meets the earth and all in the distance and so on. Okay, let me just give you guys an example to show you all an image made with 1 point perspective. So this is a painting where, as you can see, in the distance the train goes and vanishes into that vanishing point. The platform goes there too, and everything falls in line with this grid that you see, right? One instance where this character is a bit out of perspective, which is a mistake I made as well, but we can always learn from it, is that when you're drawing a character that's away from, you know, this central point, like the vertical and the horizontal point, they will get skewed according to that perspective. So what I mean is that the shoulders, for instance, will also fall in line with that perspective. You'll see a bit of the front of them. Their waist also will fall in line with that grid, as you can see. And then you can draw your character like their shoes also, one leg over here, and if they're standing straight, the other leg will have some distance away from it because they are falling in that perspective. I mean, I drew this character falling backwards right now, but still, yeah, you get the point, right? So also, when it comes to drawing in 1 point perspective, the vertical and horizontal parts of your image, say if you're drawing a box, right, they will not really be affected by this perspective. Okay, they will be perpendicular to this horizon line, because the only thing that's getting influenced is the width of the object that is going into the distance. So that will skew accordingly to the lines that you have drawn. Like for example, if you draw like a bunch of boxes all over the page and you're adding some depth to them, right, the vertical lines won't be affected and the horizontal, but the diagonal lines, like the width of the object, will be affected. So that's important to note. Okay, when drawing things in perspective also, there's a mistake that a lot of us make and we don't pay attention to, is that how objects get skewed in perspective. Okay, so say I want to draw a window, right? Let me just quickly sketch, and I'm just estimating that this is going to be the center of the window, right? Okay, somewhere around there. Okay, but when we skew this window, say in perspective, how do we find, you know, the center, right? Because if we draw the center where it would normally be, it would look off, because objects closer to us are much wider, much larger, right? So an easy trick is to draw an X from the different corners, just join them, and where they meet, that will be the center of the object, even in perspective. Draw an X, where they meet, where they meet will be the center, both for the vertical and horizontal center. So that's how you also divide your characters, your objects also. If you're drawing a human, just draw an X from, you know, the shoulders to the feet, and you'll kind of get roughly where their waist should be. That's just a quick tip. Okay, moving on, 2 point perspective, right? So when it comes to 2 point perspective, now your objects are influenced by two different vanishing points. So, but the thing is, when it comes to 2 point perspective, the vertical is the height of the object isn't like influenced that much. So for example, if I'm drawing a box now, the width will be influenced by the distance from either side. The closer the perspective points are to each other, the more skewed the object would be, and the horizon line connects the two vanishing points. So anything on this horizon line won't be skewed that much by the perspective, but any part of the object that is above the horizon line and below, that is where you'll start seeing these changes, right? So even if I'm drawing like a human standing here, right, that human will be skewed along to this perspective, and a human standing in this side will be skewed along that perspective. So you just have to make sure how you're adding in these characters, right? You have to pay attention to them. Okay, here's an example of a sketch made with the 2 point perspective. And as you can see, I've just roughly shown how everything falls in line with the perspective. The horizon line is over there. Anything above the horizon line goes in accordance with the perspective from this point, along with the vanishing point, which is somewhere over here. So point number 2 is way off screen, point number 1 is closer, it's a bit over here. So that's just an estimate. Actually, this point should actually be a bit wider. I placed it a bit wrong because these buildings they are skewing a bit too sharp according to this point. Okay, so that's just a mistake from my end. But anyway, when it comes to 3-point perspective, now there's a third, a vertical axis. Okay, so your image when you draw, say, the same box, right? Now it will also be vertically skewed. So that is another important point to note. But again, see, these are all just technicalities. This is just theory as we know it. You'll only start getting it better once you start practicing them. So even if I'm drawing, say, a human on top of this box, right, his vertical stature will be skewed by this third point. So if he's standing on top of this box, so that is how you get third point your third point. And if you take this third point perspective below the horizon, your object will be skewed in the opposite way. You know, the bottom of the object will be narrow and the top will be more skewed as such. So it's fun to play with the positions of the 3 points, and also show you guys how to quickly create this guide on Photoshop as well later on in this video. So here's an image that I had painted out, and regarding using 3 points. So the first point of perspective is here in the distance. As you can see, the grids on the tiles and all these objects are going in accordance with the perspective, but we have this wall of the room that is cutting across, right? So that is where we get the second point of perspective, okay, and which is completely way off the canvas. So here's where you can see the walls get skewed along that by getting influenced by the point, the wall, the AC, the curtains, they're all skewed. But also to push it more, I added a third point perspective, which now affects the vertical objects, right? Like here, over here, the door is pretty skewed. Like the top of the door is much wider than the bottom of the door, and so on. The walls corners aren't perpendicular to the horizon line as such, you know. So why do we use 3-point perspective? It's also to get more of the scene into the canvas, and also to add this dynamic sort of a dramatic view. Okay, but when creating concept art, it's important to note that you also have to keep camera lenses in mind and see what is capable of, you know, getting the perspective you want. But if it's like 2D animation, you don't have to worry, you can do whatever. Okay, now how do you get better at perspective? These are all technicalities. I've shown you 1 point, 2 point, 3 point. You can just draw it and draw buildings in between, and you get an image that's influenced by perspective, right? But how do you get better is through this main point, okay, which is observation. This is key. Okay, so when it comes to observation, we need to look at the world around us, okay, and also other artworks whenever you look at them. What I mean by that is, yeah, I'll give you guys an example. Is from this. This is an image of from my balcony, okay, and if you look at it normally, it's just a normal image. I'm not really looking at the colors, the way the light affects everything. It is a good reference image I'd like to use, but over here, when it comes to perspective, this is what I mean, okay. So if I add 1 point of perspective here, you can see how everything in the image falls in line with it, okay. And along with this, like as I mentioned before, the horizontal, everything that needs to be horizontal here is horizontal, vertical as such. It is a little off skewed, like a little bit where there's a third point over here, but that does not matter. As this was taken on a wide angle, it's not entirely perfect. But if I were to paint this out, I'd use completely vertical lines for this. If you can see how everything over here falls in line with the single vanishing point of perspective, it's pretty crazy, you know. That being said, also here's another example. This is a picture from my room itself, taking a picture of the balcony outside. There are 3 points of perspective here. I'll quickly point them out. First point is off canvas. It's in the distance, but you can see how the lines from the door, the tiles on the ground, are all lining up to this 1 point. They're all influenced by this 1 point. And then once we add in the second point, we can see again how the tiles, the flow is influenced by it. I don't know if you can actually make out the objects in the darkness over here. There's a bed over there, the balcony outside, the parapet outside, and everything falls in line with the second point, right? But there's also a vertical line of influence over here, okay, which is the third point. This skews the door, the walls, everything in accordance with it. As you can see, the doors are much wider at the top as opposed to the bottom. Same goes with the curtains and everything else. So when you're looking around or clicking reference images, it's always important to have these in mind, okay? Because this also helps framing your images and where you can place your character in, right? Okay, so it's just important to keep in mind. Now, how do I create these grids on Photoshop? Okay, let's get to that. There are about 3 ways that I go about it, okay? First up is the most basic. I draw a line, I duplicate that line, I rotate it about, okay? There you go. I duplicate those two and I rotate those two about, okay? And I get a very rough, perspective line. I can keep rotating this over and over and make it a complete grid, but that's too time consuming. I used to do this in the past. Then I found this brush from Goro Fujita from his brush pack. So it's just a one click and you get your perspective, okay? You get your perspective grid with the strong horizon point, okay? So it's just a one click. I'll also link my brushes down in the description. This is part of that pack. But what I use mainly, okay, to quickly get a good guide in is I go to this hexagonal sort of tool and I change the settings to give it 100 sides and also make it a star formation and indent sides by 99%. What this then allows me to do is I can create a 100 pointed star like out of lines. And as you can see, this, let me just rasterize this. Okay, I don't like this center over here, so I usually just erase it out because that's just a black blob in the center, right? And I kind of get this grid, so yeah, that's 1 point perspective. Duplicate that, get my 2nd point perspective, duplicate that, and I usually get my 3rd point perspective like that. Then I can use this grid, to draw everything in between. So that's just a quick guide. If y'all are using Procreate, it's already inbuilt. Just go up to, I think, Canvas and Drawing Guide, and you get your perspective over there where you can add up to 3 points of perspective and so on at this point. So yeah, it's quick, easy, and just practice a lot. Look at other artists' works, how they've managed to use mainly these 3 points of perspective, and also look at real life around you. There is, of course, fisheye and other stuff that's a little more advanced, but you normally don't need that, especially if you're a beginner at this stage. First get good with these 3 points and then take it up from there. So yeah, this was it. I hope this was helpful, and stay tuned for more videos. Thank you guys.